Serious, what is your small town dark secret story? This is a sad one to me. There was an older couple here who ran a halfway house for troubled kids who'd recently gotten out of juvie. They fostered a few as well. They were loved in the community. Wonderful people. One of them had an older brother who was a gangbanger in the nearest big city. During a visit, he snuck his 15-year-old younger bro a handgun. Younger bro ended up holding up a local gas station and killed 3 people. One of them was my friend's cousin. The foster parents lost whatever credentials they needed to do what they did. The kids went back into the system, and the giant house has been abandoned since around 2009. This is more comical than dark. A house burned down in this small town of 600 population, 1 block from the fire station. Being a volunteer fire department, nobody was at the station. They tried to get the pumper truck out, but one of the volunteers had run it into a brick building the week before and it was still at the shop. We're still undecided whether the house owner burned it down for the insurance. Strange that there was nothing valuable inside. About 40% of my hometown was homeless. No one had jobs. No one could afford any kind of housing situation. Neighbors paid for heat where they could on houses people were squatting in and everyone invited everyone else over for dinner every night. We didn't know who was homeless. We just did it. We hired anyone and everyone for odd jobs. A lot of people just lived as they would when they were kids. Keep the fireplace going with trees you had chopped down. Gathered water by the well and traded. Farmed and trapped for food. I went to school with a lot of homeless kids. We had, looking back, the most robust school breakfast program I've ever heard of. I thought it was normal for over half the school to show up until I moved to the city. You just gave people the dignity they deserved. No one was shamed if they dropped out at grade 10. We all knew that if they needed the job they should take it. Looking back I realize how wild it is. Our town was so poor and no one was treated any different by me and mine at least. Sure, there were some rich people, but they overwhelmingly went to the other school. And there were no panhandlers, no beggars, nothing like that. I was just told the Buseys were coming over for dinner. Did I like them? No. I kinda think they were D's, but never did I make them feel uncomfortable. And most just ate, had some tea, and left. And if that doesn't tickle your fancy, a whale washed up on shore one week and all the guys in the local high school took turns having sex with it. All of them. Edit. To clarify, the whale part happened after I graduated by a few years. It was a very public thing when it was happening and no one likes to talk about it since. 15 years ago, the local district attorney called his longtime girlfriend and told her he was taking the day off from work and that he loved her. He parked his car in town and went for a stroll past the local shops. He hasn't been seen since. His car was found where he had parked it the next day. He had left his cell phone in the car, but his keys and wallet were missing. Later that year, his laptop, so on its hard drive, was found under a bridge at a nearby river. The hard drive was eventually discovered by a local woman walking along the bank of the river, but it was too damaged to recover any data from. Interestingly, investigators discovered that someone had done a search on his home computer for how to wreck a hard drive. Did he jump from a local bridge? Did he encounter someone whom he had prosecuted who did him harm? Or did he escape his life to start a new one? Thanks, Ufligo098, for the award. Oh, I have a doozy. Short version. Popular kids in high school run a secret towel fight club and accidentally kill one of their friends in the house of a local politician, who proceeds to bury the story. Towel fight club. Tape towels over your hands and beat each other up. It's supposed to be just boxing, but it sounds like they got out of control and hardly could call it that. About 10 years ago a lot of homeless people disappeared, and when the police did the investigation they found out a guy was kidnapping and eating those people. Police found his hideout and found a half-eaten body and bones from another person. People don't like to talk about it, but everyone knows what happened. About 30 years ago a local 8-year-old girl went missing during the annual carnival downtown. After a few days they found a suspect that was seen near the girl right before she went missing. The guy confessed to her horrific murder and abuse and torture. He was the kid's next door neighbor and friend to the kid's dad. I'll spare the details, but it was really bad. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years or so. After 8 years he was paroled and returned to the same house with his parents. Right next door. Laws were a bit different then. To the family of the girl and former friend. About a week later the man never showed up at his parole office. His parents filed a missing persons report. Rumor has it that several friends of the victim's father took care of him. If you talk to them they just say that they are sure that he won't be back. There's a half-submerged submarine from the war in the bay where I live. You can walk out to it when the tide is out. In the late 80s somebody cut open the hatch. One of the only visible parts left sticking out the sand. Climbed in and was having a look around. The tide came in and he drowned. If I remember rightly the whole hatch was filled with cement. Then welded shut to stop it happening again. Edit. Words. There were rumors that there was a secret passage from the village's churchyard to the coal cellar on our grounds, which were used by Jews to hide and flee from Nazis. Not sure that qualifies as dark. As a teen in high school, the health teacher got caught sleeping with student. Everyone magically passed that year, including me who skipped almost every day lol. Then a few years ago in another small town, 2 different scandals within the space of 5 years. First one, teachers at a preschool were dosing children with melatonin at nap time. Second one, a very well-known and respected funeral home went under investigation for selling body parts. Edited to clarify events were in different towns. The new police chief's bachelor party was held at the local strip club. It was videoed when video was new. The cops broke in looking for the tape which was also recorded. New chief lost the job within a month. The school resources officer ended up sleeping with a senior at the high school. He was fired but they ended up staying together and now have 2 kids. The cop now works at Goodwill. They are happy. The town I was raised in wasn't exactly small, but here's the one dark secret I know. My hometown was where lots and lots of sports players had their mansions. And so of course, their wives and children were out and about in the community a lot. Every single sports player wife in that town is heavily addicted to opioids. Every single one. Opioid addiction is obviously an epidemic all over the country, but among the rich wives in the town, it had a 100% infection rate, so to speak. I know because one of my friend's mom was the hairdresser for basically every single one of those wives. I was homeless my senior year of HS, and one of the sports player wives heard about me from her, and she gifted me an iPhone. That phone was pennies to her, but I still wish I'd expressed my thanks more, because that wife died of an overdose not long after. Sorry if that wasn't much of a dark secret, but yeah. We have a vineyard hill next to our village. On that hill there's a big wooden cross. Lots of people go there to drink, have a walk or with their dogs, but almost nobody knows why the cross is here. During war, a vineyard keeper lived there with his son. His son was recruited and the man was left alone. When war ended, his son survived and wanted to prank his dad by sneaking on him at night. But vineyard keeper saw him and thought he was a robber, so he grabbed his rifle and shot the robber. When he found out it was his son, it broke his heart. He dug a grave on top of the hill for his son and erected a big wooden cross next to the grave. When he was done, he laid next to his son and shot himself. From that day, no one worked on the vineyards and there's a big wooden cross on top of the hill. Now, you can't even recognize there's a grave. Maybe not dark so much as wild. When I was in 1st grade, a guy called the police from multiple different phones saying there was a bomb in each of the schools in the town. 3 elementary, 1 middle, 1 high school, and all of the schools were evacuated. Turns out, while the entire police force was split up, he robbed a bank and got away with it. In Taiwan, there used to be a serial killer that would murder females in his taxi and turn them into xiaolongbao, pork soup dumpling. He would eat them and sometimes sell them. The mayor of the town I live just outside of was murdered by his girlfriend a little while back, and there was a realtor that was using his company as a front for smuggling drugs. Other than that, it's the usual small southern town crap. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband and got pregnant with him. When she has the child, it was quite clearly not the husband's child, so he kicked her out of the house. The woman broke down and went out drinking. Then when she was about to return to her husband, she picked her baby up, dropped it down a rubbish chute and left it there. The next morning she remembered what she did and went back to find the baby, but of course only people with access to the chute can go inside, so she had to wait hours, possibly days, for someone to unlock it and go inside. The baby was long dead by then. The woman killed herself shortly after. This developed into a ghost story later. People say you can hear the baby crying from inside the rubbish chute, and you can hear the woman crying on one of the stairways. The headmaster of one of the elementary schools has a long history of physically and mentally abusing young boys. When I was growing up, my small town had a spate of murders. About 6 in about as many months. This was in the 70s, nothing like it before or after. I used to do pest control in rural West Texas, and one of the places I serviced was a church in a town called Hamlin. Turns out Joel Osteen's father was a preacher there decades ago, before he went to Houston and started his mega church there. But why did he leave Hamlin, Texas and head south, one may ask? Well, according to the pastor of the church in Hamlin and everyone that worked there, it's because Joel's father had an affair and knocked up his mistress. Word quickly spread in small town Hamlin, and Papa Osteen was pretty much run out of town. He went south, ran another church somewhere for a bit, and then made his way to Houston, where he founded the mega church that his little bastard Antichrist would eventually become famous for. Edit: apparently the poser's name is Osteen, not Olstein. Also, found a wiki page for his dad. It mentions the church in Hamlin, but for some reason left out the part about banging others' itches. Where I grew up, there were murders, swingers, sexual abuse, pedophiles, corrupt law enforcement, and gang violence. Place had a population of about 600 people. Not the dark but yeah shady AF guy, blue collar, but running for a local political office, comes home to his wife of 7 years. Finds her being shagged by some guy. He whips out a gun and shoots the guy a few times. The man survives. Finds out that his wife was cheating on him and it wasn't rape. Here is where it gets dirty. So, the police want to press charges against him for attempted murder, since they say he knew his wife played around. So the DA comes to him and tells him to stop running for office and withdraw. He does, and the charges go away. No crime here, folks. Look up the Gainesville Ripper. Killed a bunch of students and dismembered the bodies in really gross ways. This was about 30 years ago. I guess it's not really a secret if there are podcasts about it, but it's slowly being forgotten. Town in Africa I visited as part of a uni thing. Basically had a guy way back when who was running to clean up the area. Apparently there had been a lot of white murders. Some ritualistic thing where their ears were being cut off. And at the time, white voters had a lot more power than black voters there. Anyway, his campaign is he'll stop the white murders. And he gets elected on this hard on crime attitude. And suddenly, they stop. Everyone's super stoked. Until time goes by and they are not just reduced, but non-existent overnight, with no real action or people brought to justice. Anyway, everyone starts investigating him. Eventually this spills over to a bunch of folks forming a bit of a mob and charging into his office to try find a ledger for paying off the gangland people. They don't find a ledger, they found an earbox. This event was so bad, Coatesville was removed from maps for a bit. I borrowed this from our Wikipedia page. In August 1911, steel worker Zachariah Walker was lynched in Coatesville. He had left his wife and children in Virginia while seeking better work. This African American man was accused of killing Deputy Constable Coal and Iron Policeman Edgar Rice, a popular figure in town. Walker claimed self-defense and was hospitalized after his arrest. He was dragged from the hospital and burned to death in front of a mob of hundreds in a field south of the city. 15 men and teenage boys were indicted, but all were acquitted at trials. The lynching was the last in Pennsylvania and is said to have left a permanent stain on the city's image. Some dude that owned a froyo shop knocked one of his female employees unconscious and she woke up inside this soundproof room in said yogurt shop bound up and wearing a diaper. She managed to escape and get the cops called. A guy I went to high school with threw a trailer hitch at an indigenous woman and yelled "got one" when he did. She suffered terrible injuries and was in the hospital for months before eventually dying. She had some other health conditions that didn't make it easy for her to stay alive. He was being tried for aggravated assault first, then they brought it up to second-degree murder. It's being brought down to manslaughter because they didn't have enough evidence to charge it as murder. He pleaded guilty to the manslaughter charge. My city is plagued with a major prejudice to the indigenous people. My family was the same way. I grew up thinking it was normal and said some terrible things. I realized I didn't even know why I had this hate. I did a 180 on that a while ago. This is how a lot of the town is. And the sad part is there are so many people in the city that are on this guy's side. Because she was going to die anyway because they were just looking for hookers or she was drunk, basically anything to cover up what they really mean because she is native. It's like this is normal here. The police have labeled some deaths as accidental drownings even though it's clear that they didn't just fall into the river. Someone I knew was picked up and almost thrown in themselves if it wasn't for a stranger. Canada has a lot of issues like this already. The tragedies surrounding the indigenous people. But our city is one of the worst. Seeing people discarded like that makes me feel disgusted and guilty to have been proud to be Canadian. 2 stories. A neighboring town had a young high school girl killed by a train. She was walking home from school and went across the railroad tracks. There was no warning indication as the indicators didn't trigger at the time. A malfunction was to blame. The girl was run over and cut right in half. There is a memorial still in place by the railroad tracks years later. There's also a man in our town that claims to run a disposal business. What ended up happening was when the townspeople paid this man for hauling out their garbage or unwanted materials, he dumped them around abandoned buildings, sides of the road and even behind a local mechanic shop. He was then quickly banned from posting about his business and he still tries to pull this stuff to this day. He's been banned on all the forms after this incident. Edit. I'm sure some will be asking where was this? I won't say the town name but this happened in the northern part of the Midwest. I was a bit too young to understand at the time. But Urbana, Illinois had the infamous enema bandit. He broke into houses and forced young women to have enemas. Left square bracket. I got fired from my first job bussing tables when I was like 13 for taking a dare to snort a line of sweet and low one day when we had no customers. The boss had heard about it and flipped his it. Turns out it was because he was not so subtly selling tons of coke out of the shop and it became a well-known drug front until he was busted shortly after. In my country crime is pretty high and weird, it happens all the time. Basically the closest I have to a small town dark secret is when a manhole was overflowing and 2 aborted fetuses from some back alley abortion clinic washed out of it. The police released a statement saying that you shouldn't use these clinics despite the fact that there are literally adverts for it everywhere for years. Some decades ago, one of the teachers of our elementary school was a pedophile and would regularly take a pupil with him up to his lodge where he did stuff. The people that were harmed are now in their 40s and either need lots of therapy, damaged beyond the point where therapy can bring them back, or dead, suicide. Knowing this, and then looking at the poor widows of our village, I feel so sorry for them. Oh, so many. Guy killed his cousin in a hunting accident as teens, except both were experienced hunters and the cousin was wearing orange. Few years later the guy was arrested for killing a man and kidnapping, raping, and then killing his wife. Many also believe he committed another murder arson that happened in the years between the 2 other incidents. But it's never been proven. A girl was abducted from her car and her body was found several days later 100 miles away. Nobody was ever arrested although the boyfriend was accused. Also a girl I went to high school with had an affair with her friend's dad when she was 17 and he was 45. Ick. Our small town had something. Our China buffet would take the female employees from the restaurant across town to a massage parlor and forced into giving massages happy endings. Not so much a secret, but the city where I grew up in Eastern MA became rather infamous thanks to the opioid epidemic. One of our T station's neighborhoods became a mimetic junkie central. That's how bad it was. There's also a number of bodies found here that have been attributed to Whitey Bulger and his gang. Found buried under bridges, along beaches, even one in a tuxedo found in a car, riddled with bullets, that was submerged in a quarry, and a torso stuffed in plastic found in a creek, where I took part in a yearly summer sailing kayaking program for kids, in the mid-90s. Adam Lanza, we've moved since but duck him. It's not actually a dark secret, it's something a lot of people now but the younger generation does know. In my area we had a mental hospital and that was shut down 10 or 15 years ago, but at the time a lot of people was killed by the way they tried to treat the patients. What I know, around 150 patients died either from trying to kill themselves or get killed by the treatments. Some of the treatments were electrocution to the brain, removing a part of the brain. There were a lot more type of treatments, but these are the only ones I remember being told. We had the crazy rich guy from the 1600-1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so decided that when he died he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. I think I was senior in high school when this happened, but it was in our local paper every day for a long time. The details are hazy, but I'll do my best to recount them. 4 athletic male students had sexually assaulted a female sophomore student. One male had access to keys of the room it happened because his parent worked for the administration. They apparently picked her up to get food and then went to the school locker room. 2 of them pressured her to participate in an act she did not want to and thought she was in physical danger had she not done anything. The female student 100% went to court and then they completely turned it around on her. That she asked for it. That it was her fault. etc. They said if she really did not want to comply, she would have fought harder or her clothes would have been torn or bloodied up. She just left that school and moved instead of staying. I don't believe much happened to the male students at all. As for the male students, no one had to register for anything. No one went to jail. Their futures were all intact. I think 2 had to do service hours and probation, but that was it. This is my sister's story. I was 5 and she was 11 at the time. I lived in Georgia for a few months while my parents were deployed there and we stayed on base in a relatively small area. In our neighborhood everyone knew everyone, and since ours was connected to a civilian neighborhood we would all play together. I was on a walk with my older sister and apparently this old man started following us. We didn't notice at first, but he started walking faster. When he got too close my sister turned around and he walked up to a house and went up to the door. My sister started to freak out and we hurried home. She told our mom and she asked around. No one knew who that guy was. She contacted the whole president of the other neighborhood and he said the same thing. Later we found out he had tried to kidnap another kid that lived a few houses down from us. There was a police investigation and my sister had to give a statement. I'll never stop being grateful to my sister cause we could have gotten taken that day. There was a serial killer in my hometown who was never caught in the 70s. We always believed it was one of our neighbors, was extremely creepy and met the age timeline, but there was no confirmation. The neighbor kept wolves on leashes he had purchased and bred, so nobody could come near his house. He always gave my dad the creeps, and he came and snuck in our yard and tried to talk to me and my kid sister when we were 5/7 playing outside, and my dad had to run him out of our yard at gunpoint. Well, the man died without ever being convicted, but he passed on to his son a sick obsession with John Wayne Gacy, and his son ended up killing his mother and putting her in a concrete barrel under the porch. He is still in prison, and we still believe his father was that killer from the 70s, especially since he passed that on to his son who became a murderer obsessed with serial killers. There was this girl that was in the grade above me and she became a teacher at the same school we both went to. She was very stuck up and thought she was better than everyone else. Apparently she was working out at the weight room and this underage boy came in. They go in the back. She gives him head while someone walks in on them both. You would think she would be arrested for something like this, but no. Her father was one of our football coach's health teacher and I'm sure he pleaded with the boy's parents not to press charges. It must have worked because she didn't go to jail. She did lose her job though. Being privileged shouldn't pardon you for your inexcusable actions. 2 different girls in my town disappeared 10 years apart. The secret is that everyone knew who had done it. It was the original girl's ex-boyfriend and he bragged and confessed to his friends and acquaintances for 10 years that he had murdered her. He was never arrested because of most of the people he told didn't want to go to the police because of drug usage, and the police felt like they never had enough evidence. So the second girl starts seeing him and even tells her friends that she doesn't think he's dangerous like everyone says, and disappears, and he's still out there bragging. They find the second girl's car burned out in the woods and he has burns on his hands. No one does anything because there's no bodies. Then a mushroom hunter stumbles on the two corpses deep in the woods, buried in shallow graves side by side. The guy finally got arrested, but last I heard the police bungled the investigation again and a bunch of evidence was thrown out. So far he hasn't had a trial because he was declared unfit. Left square bracket. Edit. Better link. Left square bracket.